So last week I wrote a 10-step plan. I do it every year, kind of an annual fun exercise that just allows me to conceptualize what this entire offseason will look like and the decisions the Vikings are going to need to make. And I mean, I ran through everything: quarterback, center, safety, um, cap space moves, draft priorities, Rob Brzezinski. I mean, everything was kind of run through in that 10-step plan. But the thing that I agonized over most, by far not even close, where, my editor knows this, but late the night before, I was still shuffling what I wanted to do with that quarterback spot. The thing I agonized most was the quarterback position and what the Vikings can do that makes you feel really good about things moving forward. And it's really difficult. I ended up settling with Kyler Murray. I didn't feel great about it. And frankly, in the comments section and both on social media, I mean, I was torched for the idea of Kyler Murray. And I've seen so many thoughts on, I mean, I've texted with buddies about Kirk Cousins. I've texted with people about Geno, the Mac Jones conversation. Derek Carr's name came up, and there was a harsh reaction to that. I mean, whether Jimmy G, I remember throwing out that name months ago just on a whim, and people were infuriated by that. And I mean, whether you go Jarrett Stidham, Tanner McKee, Zach Wilson, Anthony Richardson, I mean, none of these guys probably get the majority of the fan base fired up. I mean, that's just, I think, something that I have identified from the reactions to when these names are surfaced. So, I mean, for the Vikings and Rob Brzezinski, who now has a few months of runway to be able to kind of restructure things, refine the operations, streamline decision making, and provide an impression of what he's able to do in the role that he currently has right now in the interim. Like, it's hard to probably, I don't know what the Vikings can do that will have a positive approval rating at this position among pretty much everybody. As far as the film goes, and I'll just take these guys but one by one, and I didn't, like, I haven't jotted down notes on all of them, but just what I think about when I mention these names and I consider the film that I've watched of them. I mean, Kirk Cousins, like, pretty much, if you go back and rewatch the late season play for him in Atlanta, it's not crazy different from the Kirk Cousins that you guys know well from his time in Minnesota. I mean, he processes the field. He is professional at the line of scrimmage. He I'm not sure from a receiving core perspective. He didn't have Drake London in a lot of those games, and so he wasn't working with the most exceptional group. But the mobility is what it has always been. He can get backside. He's willing to throw it over the middle of the field. I'm not sure he quite has the arm strength that he had a few years ago, but I still think from a touch perspective, from a timing anticipation perspective, he still can get you to a certain level of quarterback play. Mac Jones, I didn't mind the Mac Jones tape, really. I mean, that's not probably crazy praise, but felt like he was accurate for the most part. Is very willing to push the ball over the middle of the field. And whether it's a byproduct of San Francisco's offense, but like the anticipatory stuff over the intermediate part of the field really shows up on film. He can throw to the wide side of the field with accuracy. He's pretty accurate. And the decision making was pretty good with him. So, how much is he worth? Like, is he worth the second round pick? If you trade a second round pick, are you essentially committing to him as a starter, which then puts JJ McCarthy on the back burner? Like, all of those questions are valid and worth having, but I'd say the Mac film, probably for me, like and then you factor in his age and just injury toughness too, like probably a minor tiny notch above Kirk Cousins. Geno Smith, I'd say the film for me was probably a notch down from both of those two. Not a big notch down because as you'll hear me say probably at the end of this, like I feel like all these guys are pretty much in a similar tier. You're not, it wasn't for me at least watching the film like there one of these guys was head and shoulders above everybody else, which maybe that means from the Viking standpoint, you just, whoever's the easiest to acquire and who's ever most willing to compete, like maybe that's just the path that you take. Um, but Gino, he will push it. Didn't think the arm strength was phenomenal. Not a ton of anticipatory stuff. And then there was some sketchy decision making with him over the course of this season with the Raiders. Now, how much of that was their offensive situation? How much of that was being sped up because of the offensive line? Those are questions that I'd have to probably speak to people in Las Vegas and can probably try to do that over the course of the next month. But yeah, I'd say for me, and this is just my film watching evaluation, like I'd say I'd have in this, they're all grouped in the same tier, but it would be Mac, Kirk, then Gino. Derek Carr is probably right around the Kirk level. When you look back at what he did in 2024 with the Saints, I do feel like there is a lot of crossover from the Kubiak offense that he played in New Orleans. He like Kirk, very professional at the line of scrimmage. Maybe a little bit more arm strength than what Kirk showed on tape. Probably less full processing ability, and I mean there would probably be questions of like how much is he going to push it down the field, but I thought the Derek Carr tape was, I mean, definitely serviceable. And in this offense, if the run game is improved and you can protect them, like and you have the defense that you had in 2025, and special teams is rock solid. Like you definitely feel somewhat comfortable of winning a certain amount of games in the regular season, and then in the playoffs, I mean, you'd be fighting an uphill battle. Um, I'd say Tanner McKee, probably like Geno-ish tier. He's a backup for the Eagles. Not mobile at all, but definitely can play in rhythm and looks like he sees it fairly well, pretty accurate. He's like 6'5", 220, just really, really tall. And not as much, not I mean, not remotely close to as much experience as any of these other guys. And then you get into Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson and Anthony Richardson. I mean, it's less with those guys. It's much more projection. It's much less accuracy, probably, and consistent accuracy. And you'd really, I mean, those guys would be very much like could push JJ McCarthy and I mean Anthony Richardson. There's no doubt he has a lot of qualities that are intriguing, but I mean, you're taking a massive risk on on what your floor actually would be if your quarterback room was, let's say, like a JJ Anthony Richardson and Kenny Pickett. And now there it's a risk where there is some ceiling if those guys could develop to a certain place. But I mean, again, the floor would be at a certain spot. Kyler Murray for me, I mean, just strictly on like raw talent alone, he's probably like right a notch above Mac. But you're dealing with a lot of dynamics with Kyler where, does he see the field maybe as well as Mac? I'm not so sure. Is the arm strength, it's probably comparable to Mac. He can make more happen with his legs, but he's had durability concerns himself. Is he as stable in the pocket as a guy like Mac or Kirk or Derek Carr? Like I think that's or even Geno maybe. Like that's probably a fair question. But again, like I think the more you watch the group that I just mentioned, the more you kind of realize that when you evaluate them, yes, there's certain elements of some of these guys that I think intrigues you more than others, but they're all kind of in a tier where if they are starting for you in the regular season and you have, again, to reiterate, the defense that you had, a rock solid special teams and an improved run game, you probably feel like you can win a certain amount of regular season games. Where that leaves you in the playoffs, Probably depends on how good is the defense, how good is the run game, how much can you rely on that stuff versus having to rely on that quarterback, which to me gets back a little bit to like the first topic of this podcast, in that I mean, unless the Vikings can go out and acquire a Joe Burrow or a CJ Stroud or someone you feel like can shoulder the entire offense from a passing game perspective, like as much as we will and definitely rightfully need to talk about the quarterback play, I do think there is a healthy amount of the conversation that should be, regardless, what does the run game look like? Like it is the run game with Frank Smith's addition as the assistant head coach going to take a step? Are they going to practice it more? What is Aaron Jones going to be back? If he's not, who can they pair with Jordan Mason to be more of the every down back who can pass protect and catch? Like that is a component of it that we love, and we have to talk about these decisions in a vacuum, especially at quarterback, because it's the quarterback position, and we're, this is the NFL and it's the most important position. But you really, again, like the first conversation, if you talk about the quarterback play, but then leave out the importance of the rest of all of that stuff, I think it's a little misguided of where the Vikings can go. So that's kind of how I wanted to sum that up after watching all of those guys, and I'll probably watch more of it. And if there's other guys you're curious about and want me to watch or provide a more detailed evaluation with specific nuggets of plays and examples, I can do that too. But thought for the podcast on YouTube and via audio, this would probably be the best way to run through it. Because I mean, again, I have spent a lot of time just looking at it and watching it, because I mean, really for me, it's like, can you uncover a person or a player or a prospect that you feel like has that potential Sam Darnold arc? And I mean, maybe of them, the closest one is probably Mac Jones, which is why the 49ers right now are driving as hard of a bargain as they are to move him. So yeah, it's going to be, like I said, it's going to be really interesting to see what the Vikings do. I think it'll be really fascinating and telling to see what the Vikings value and how, committed they are to JJ McCarthy. And we'll obviously document it here in on the podcast and in writing. And I'm going to bring in some other people who know these quarterbacks really well, just to talk about what they see on film, maybe go back and forth, disagree, just kind of talk about it from that standpoint, because the more perspectives, the better. Over at The Athletic, I'm going to have a mock draft on Thursday, the first one of the cycle. It's mock draft season, folks. I'll probably make 9 picks, try to get a bunch of different positions. I've watched a lot of draft guys, and we'll have more conversation about that once we get past free agency. Looking forward to the next couple weeks, specifically at the combine in the next month or so. And we will have shows for you guys multiple times throughout each week. So stay tuned. Thank you to First Resource Bank for presenting. Thank you to Unreal for sponsoring. And with that, this is episode 146. We will talk to you very, very soon. All right, before we go further, I do want to say this show, the Alec Lewis Show, is presented by First Resource Bank. That is a member FDIC bank in the Minneapolis area, run by really, really good people, Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson, who are Vikings fans. They really care about this community. They've got branches all over the place, and the online banking platform saved me when I moved up to Minnesota, in that I have a very sleek and modern design to be able to utilize from a banking standpoint. So First Resource Bank, please go check them out. Show is also sponsored by Unreal, locally owned and operated clothing brand that is as high quality as you're going to find. I wear it too much, but it's hard not to when the clothes feel as good as they do and look as good as they do. So please support Unreal. Their information is also in the description below. All right, we're going to segue a little bit to the Vikings 2026 quarterback circumstances here. So I'd say this time of year, over the next month, the quarterback and who the Vikings acquire to either pair with JJ McCarthy or have as competition with JJ or have as the starter for the 2026. I don't want to rule out really anything at this point. That is going to come into focus over the next month, and I would expect by the time we're talking on February 11th, or excuse me, March 11th, a month from now, there's probably going to have to be a definitive answer one way or another. And so I would highly doubt that it drags on further, which would be a repeat of last year and how that played out. The combine is February 23rd, and the legal tampering period begins March 9th. So within those, dates, a lot of the conversation will be, it will dominate the media space, whether it's stories at the Athletic, whether it's reports on Twitter. Like, this is where a lot of the conversation is going to happen. I view this as a very fascinating situation, and here's why. If you, being the Vikings, are going to fully commit to a competition, you're probably going to limit the types of players that you can pair with JJ McCarthy. A lot of these experienced quarterbacks, accomplished quarterbacks, are going to want guarantees in some form or fashion that they have a really good chance at starting. And like, while I have heard a lot, and a lot of people have thrown out to me the idea that the Vikings situation is very similar to Anthony Richardson from a year ago, which allowed Indianapolis to sway Daniel Jones to sign with them to compete and eventually win that competition. Like, it feels to me, and I did not, I wasn't a voracious consumer of all Anthony Richardson content before last spring, but it feels to me like the Colts were very much closer to leaning out on the idea of Anthony Richardson than the Vikings have at least publicly been from with JJ McCarthy. And so the perception for quarterbacks that the Colts coveted and courted last spring probably made it easier for them to convince those quarterbacks that they would come in and have a really good opportunity to start at the outset, which was definitively the reason that Daniel Jones chose the Colts as opposed to the Vikings. Now, I'll say this, and this is based upon a lot of discussions that I have had with people across the industry. The Vikings circumstances, when you're talking about Kevin O'Connell as the head coach and play caller and offensive designer, Justin Jefferson as a superstar receiver, the organization and how they treat players, like, the Vikings circumstances are still very well thought of throughout the industry. One season of a 9-8 go around that raised a lot of questions and ended obviously with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's firing has not poured cold water on the entire perception externally in the industry of what the Vikings can provide for a quarterback. But that still does not mean and guarantee that a quarterback is going to choose you just because of those circumstances. These quarterbacks are sharp. Their representation is very aware and very keen on wanting to place and wanting to guide their quarterback to the best scenario that leads to the best future opportunity. And so, I really see this as a fascinating dynamic in the Vikings, trying to still thread this needle and ride this line of they're still in on JJ McCarthy, and he showed promise over the back half of last season, even if the questions about his availability still very much persist. And yet they want to round out their quarterback room as best as possible. And it's like, the question that I would ask, just as someone analyzing it, is can you get the best type of quarterback play surrounding JJ McCarthy if you are unwilling to relent on the idea of JJ having a great opportunity to start for the 2026 season? And so how the Vikings thread that dynamic publicly certainly, but also privately with conversations with quarterbacks and agents, etc., is very interesting to me, and I think it's going to be like very revealing in terms of how committed Kevin O'Connell specifically and the Vikings broadly are to JJ McCarthy's potential still to reach that franchise caliber quarterback type of, ceiling. I've said this also before, and I just want to reiterate it. Like, I hear all the time the perspective of some segments of the fan base where it's like, look at how Sam Darnold with time became what he's become. And I totally understand that perspective. Quarterback development, especially for a 22-year-old, takes a long runway. And if you really look at the prime of a lot of these quarterbacks, they start to really enter it at 27 years old, at 28 years old. So, yes, absolutely, you have to give quarterbacks time to reach their fullest potential. And if they have what Sam Darnold has, which is a almost hard-headed belief in themselves and ability to block out all of the noise, they typically will, and if they find the right circumstances, they typically will reach that potential. The problem is that, and needing 5 to 7 years, is at odds with what current regimes, current head coaches, current front offices, the time that they typically have. Meaning, like, if head coaches and front offices were given 5 to 7 years of runway, you would just, continue to take the long view at every juncture and at every moment's notice. But the problem is, and you guys know this very well, coaches typically don't have beyond like a 3 year runway. Now, when you get extended and you accomplish and win the amount of games that Kevin O'Connell has over the course of 4 seasons, your runway definitely gets extended. But those, like, it's two separate conversations to me. Absolutely, quarterbacks need time to develop, but often regimes and coaches don't have the 5 to 7 year runway that sometimes it can take for these guys to develop. And so, um, again, how the Vikings navigate this over the next month is going to reveal a ton about where they feel JJ McCarthy is, where they feel he can go, and how committed, frankly, they are um, to him, both in the present and future. Like, the decision, Kirk Cousins had that quote a couple years ago of it's not about what the money is, but it's about what the money represents. Like, I'd say the to kind of steal from that quote, it's like the quarterback decisions that the Vikings make over the next month are going to be very representative on the opinions internally from Kevin O'Connell and this staff on JJ McCarthy, regardless of what they've said publicly. So, again, combines in 2 weeks. That's where a lot of the conversations begin. And then the legal tampering period begins March 9th. And you really can't afford to get much further than that and not have a plan or an answer, or you risk entering kind of the space that you did last year where it drags on. You end up with Sam Howell, and then you trade for Carson Wentz you trade Sam Howell, you sign Carson Wentz to replace Sam Howell. I mean, getting deeper into April without any answer or or refined plan would be repeating the mistakes of last spring, which would be disastrous more than anything else. So I'm going to talk here about the film and watching all these quarterbacks and how I've kind of thought about stacking them all up, because to me hopefully it's insightful for you guys. And I don't know, when you watch 500 to 1,000 clips of film of quarterback play that isn't the most exceptional quarterback play, I mean, you gotta talk about it somewhere, don't you? Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 146, recording on Tuesday, February 10th, a couple days after the Super Bowl, and only a couple of weeks until the scouting combine in Indianapolis. I will be there really for the duration of that entire week, talking to anybody and everybody across the NFL. For those of you who don't know, it is kind of like the NFL's spring convention where, yes, there are measurements going on inside Lucas Oil Stadium, but there are also agents and executives and coaches and reporters and everybody involved with the NFL weaving their ways throughout multiple hotels in downtown Indianapolis. So I'll be there for that. And we will record live from whatever hotel I have booked for that week, which begins on February 23rd. And there are a lot of conversations that take place there that will influence where things go from a free agency and draft perspective. So it's always one of the most fun weeks of the calendar. It's one of the most exhausting weeks. It's definitely one that taxes your liver with the amount of late nights spent conversing and spending time with folks, but really looking forward to it. So just stay tuned for some coverage from Indianapolis. We're going to talk about a bunch of things here on this show. We're going to talk about Sam Darnold and what he accomplished with the Seahawks and dive into a little bit of a tangentially related conversation to a story that I wrote for Tuesday about what the Vikings can learn a little bit from what the Seahawks and Sam Darnold accomplished, especially offensively. We'll get into some quarterback specific talk when we're discussing just some of the key dates to keep in mind over the next month and really how I am going to be thinking about this quarterback conversation based upon already some phone calls that I've had even this week with agents and people throughout the league. So that will be hopefully an interesting topic for you guys. And then I've watched film on, and I think I've said this on previous episodes, but on all of the quarterback names that have gotten thrown out there as far as potential options for the Vikings to pair with JJ McCarthy. And I mean, I'm talking Kirk, I'm talking Mac Jones, I'm talking Geno, Derek Carr, Jarrett Stidham, Jimmy G, Tanner McKee, Zach Wilson, Anthony Richardson. I have watched way too much film of all of these guys. I mean, I'm talking hundreds of plays, probably close to 500 to 1,000 plays of these guys, which is not something I'd recommend unless you are an absolute sicko or you get paid to do it. But going to dive in a little bit on really all of them individually and how I have put in perspective how I think about the group collectively. So we'll get into that, and then we'll dovetail to a couple other of subjects that have been on my mind over the last couple weeks and really over the last week as I've come up from air from the aftermath, you could call it, of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's firing. If you're new here watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you don't know me, I cover the Vikings for The Athletic. I'm in the building every day, travel with the team on the road, covering games, and it's really an around-the-clock type of gig that really becomes interesting in springs like this because, as we saw last year at this time, the decisions that are made or aren't made have major ramifications for what happens over the course of the season. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify or iHeart, you can rate and review, and all of that stuff helps us out, and we appreciate it. Beginning with Sam Darnold. So, there has been, and we've talked about it even here on this podcast, so much conversation about the Vikings' decision not to bring back Sam. And I mean, we have relitigated that in stories and in topics, whether it's radio, whether it's here, so many times over. So I wanted to take kind of a different tact for a story Tuesday morning, and that story is up at The Athletic if you want the deepest dive possible. But I do think there are some things that the Vikings, especially offensively, can learn from what the Seahawks accomplished here. First and foremost, when you have that type of defense and when you also have that type of special teams, and I don't think that can go overlooked with what Seattle accomplished this year. They had the number 2 special teams in DVOA. They went out and acquired Rashid Shaheed to improve their returning ability, which really showed up late in the season. They had a respected kicker in Jason Myers. They had a really good punter in Dixon who showed himself in the Super Bowl. And so when you have, coaches throw out all the time complimentary football, but the Seahawks, in my opinion, and really in college football, Indiana was also kind of an example of this. When you throw that out, but you actually live by that, when you have a defense that can do what Seattle's defense did and a special teams that doesn't make mistakes the way that Seattle's didn't, what you need from your offense is lack of turnovers, which the Seahawks did not turn the football over one time in the playoffs. And you need both a combination of explosiveness and efficiency. And how you go about getting there really depends on what you have, on game script, and on how much risk you're willing to take on as an offense. And so the more that I've thought about what Seattle was able to do, the more difficult it has been for me not to juxtapose what they did with what the 2024 Vikings were and how those two units really operated and looked when you compare them side by side. And one of the most obvious components of those two units that just stands out is the Seahawks' willingness to stick with the run even when it wasn't uber successful. I mean, if you compare the 2024 Vikings and the 2025 Seahawks from a success rate, EPA, advanced metric standpoint, you're not going to see a drastic difference. What you are going to notice a major difference in is just Seattle's willingness to continue to run the football regardless of the score and regardless of, I mean, frankly, the running back in the game, whether it was Zach Charbonnet over the course of the season or whether it was Kenneth Walker, specifically in the playoffs, once Zach Charbonnet suffered his injury, the Seahawks committed to running the football um, and really made that such a sustainable and defiant piece of what they wanted to be offensively. So that is one component of what the Seahawks did. I mean, I pulled some of the numbers for the story that ran Tuesday morning. The Seahawks really, if you look at their balance, every coach in every offense talks about wanting to be balanced, but actually being balanced is a much different goal and a much different thing to be able to accomplish. And the Seahawks, according to True Media, I mean, they ran the ball 50% of the time and they passed the ball 50% of the time. And if you look at next gen stats, the Seahawks had a called pass on any given play at the lowest rate in the NFL, which was 51.3%. And so for me, it was a direct snapshot at Clint Kubiak and how much of a piece of his offense he wants and really demands running the football to be. And it's not like it didn't feel like, and this is more anecdotal, it didn't feel like Seattle was reinventing the wheel from the types of runs that they called or such a creative blocking scheme that it was almost hard to identify whether they were running traps or whams or duo. No, it felt like it was a very zone-based approach with every play action called built on top of the types of runs that they leaned into. Now, I will say they did have a difference at running back compared to the 2024 Vikings. The Seahawks had Zach Charbonnet, who is a very efficient runner. He's going to pick up whatever is there from a blocking perspective, and he can break tackles. And then Kenneth Walker, who is a dynamo, an explosive, incredibly quick, tough, and just creative runner who I thought this was crazy going through some of the statistics, but the Seahawks running backs forced more missed tackles, 130, than any other group of running backs in the NFL throughout the duration of the 2025 season. And so when you compare the 2024 Vikings and the 2025 Seahawks, like that is a major difference in commitment, first of all, from a running perspective, and also what they had at running back to be able to lift the ceiling or the floor, however you want to look at it with the run game, to be able to have confidence that that commitment is going to pay dividends throughout the course of the season. Now, there were other elements that made the Seahawks offense with Sam Darnold more successful than the 2024 Vikings. And you can run down the laundry list. I mean, they leaned even further into design rollouts, specifically rollouts to the left, which Sam Darnold showed an incredible ability to be able to contort his body and make throws like that on the run. There was almost a double amount of design rollouts that Seattle ran this year compared to what the Vikings ran in 2024. They threw more slants. They leaned even further into heavier personnel, which the Vikings started to do a little bit at the end of the 2025 season. But really, for the most part, that was a strategy to get the run game going, whereas Seattle has used heavy personnel really to dictate to defenses whether they're, playing light bodies or heavy bodies. If the Seahawks come out in 12 personnel, which is one running back and two receivers and two tight ends, and the opposing defenses match with lighter bodies, the Seahawks ran the ball really effectively. If they came out with that same personnel grouping and the defense matched with heavier personnel, then the Seahawks threw the ball really effectively against those personnel groupings. And so they had an ability to dictate mismatches in a way that the Vikings over the course of the last 4 years really haven't. The Vikings have loved 11 personnel, but they haven't been able to run the football out of 11 personnel against light bodies. In last season, they leaned a little further into heavier personnel, but they weren't able to throw the football as successfully against heavier bodies out of those looks. And so there are a bunch of things. Again, the summary here would be that there are a bunch of things the Vikings can take away and learn from and pull from Seattle's success around Sam Darnold in 2025. And it's not limited to just a more committed run game, a better running back, more ability to dictate with personnel groupings, more easy buttons from a passing standpoint. It is a collective, and it's all obviously dependent on who your quarterback is. If you have a Joe Burrow, or if you have a Josh Allen or a Matthew Stafford, you probably can get away with the type of approach that the Vikings had in 2024 and have had for much of Kevin O'Connell's time with the Vikings. But if you don't have that level of quarterback, and this is league wide, it's not just specific to Minnesota, I think it really is incumbent upon the staff and the rest of the offensive system and really the rest of the team to surround that player optimally so they don't have to do what they can't do, which is shoulder the entire team offensively. And so, like, I have thought a lot and reflected a lot on the last few weeks around the idea of the rookie quarterback contract. And we've talked ad nauseum and written ad nauseum about the Vikings and so much of their strategy in drafting JJ McCarthy and building things over the last two seasons really has been about the advantage that the rookie quarterback contract provides a team. And while I do think there is definitely an advantage when you have that level of when you have a certain floor from a rookie quarterback that gives you the cap space of the surplus that you're gaining at the quarterback position to be able to spend everywhere else, like that is definitely an advantage. I think maybe the conversation can be reframed a little bit to like, what is the level of quarterback play that you have? And then how can you build things around that player to establish the most optimal team environment? And that takes selflessness from, every component of your team. It takes the offensive mind, play caller, head coach being willing to say, like, this is not going to be the pass first operation, and we can live leaning on our defense and special teams as long as we're efficient and we run the football with some explosive mixed in. It takes selflessness from the quarterback. I mean, Sam Darnold was pretty selfless in the sense that Seattle loved to run the football. They didn't go for it a ton on fourth and short. And Sam obviously did not have the ego to where that rubbed him the wrong way. So I guess the point there, beyond what the Vikings can learn from what Seattle's offense did to really buoy Sam Darnold at his and lead to his best self and lead to the ultimate dream, which is the Super Bowl. I have begun to believe that the discussion should be less about, it's important to talk about, I should say, how much you're spending at quarterback and what that provides you everywhere else. But in terms of team building, there should be a very convicted and specific thought paid to what level of quarterback play are we getting? And then how does that inform what we need everywhere else in terms of running back, in terms of offensive line, in terms of play calling and game plan strategy, in terms of decisions being made within the game on fourth down, whether to punt, whether to kick, all of the it's funny because I sometimes have rolled my eyes probably in the past at the complimentary football refrain from coaches time and time again. But I do think Seattle was a great example of what can happen when you really take a broad global look at your team from a complementary standpoint and build things out with the overall vision in mind. And again, that takes selflessness, that takes very specific decision making, and that takes oftentimes balance in a lot of different ways.